Padraig, you're Executive VP and General Manager for the Colorado Rapids. I wanted to bring you in and interview you just to capture some of your positivity, if that's okay, because I feel we could all do with that just now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're dead right. I mean, it's been a challenging year for I think everybody. With a lot of inconveniences, shall we say? But there's still a huge amount to be positive about, a huge amount of good going on, a huge amount to look forward to as well. So yeah, I'm delighted to be on to chat about this.
I absolutely love your story. I remember we sat, across from each other having a beer in some smoky Dublin bar back in the day. And you were an accountant at the time, and you told me that your dream was to become a Premiership football manager or sort of general manager. I think you referenced Arsene Wenger at the time. And I didn't want to pop the bubble of your dream at the time, because I was looking at a good mate who's an accountant. But I did question to myself whether that was a realistic goal for you. Now you're general manager of the Colorado Rapids, as I say, and I'm sure you'd be sought after if you were inclined to move back and take up a role in the Premiership. I know you're quite happy where you are, but can you tell me a bit about actually how you went about achieving your dream?
Yeah, to be honest, you wouldn't have been the only one who would have popped the bubble at that point in time. I think there was definitely more than a few people who thought it was a little bit crazy or outlandish to kind of think that it was possible. But it's a funny story, to be honest. I came over to the US in '99 to just for a summer on a J1 visa. A lot of Irish folks were doing it at the time in the middle of school. And I played soccer in the Cape Cod League and got into baseball. So baseball is a big sport on the Cape Cod. It's one of the premier leagues for college players because they use a wooden bat. So a lot of the top prospects go there. Got into baseball, and that got me into following baseball when I went back home, which could only be done through numbers. You had to look at the box scores and things like that. And it got me thinking about, well, I wonder if you could apply analytics to football, and see what would happen there. Now, this is back in 2000, 2001. So I was just kicking off things with Ernst & Young at the time. And Wenger, I think you're dead right. The two big names for me were Billy Beane on the baseball side, who's, was made famous probably globally through Moneyball, the Michael Lewis book and the film. But Wenger was somebody who was very much looking at that kind of thing and kind of trying to think, outside the box and look at different ways to value players. So I kicked it off like that, and it wasn't a very good model that I built, to be honest, the first iteration at least, but kept going. And then, once I'd moved, I obviously left Ernst & Young to go to the FAI as what was called internal compliance officer at the time, which was really just to introduce a salary cap into Irish soccer, which was the first one in European football. So I did that, and that gave me access to a little bit more data, a little bit more information, and that kind of continued to grow. So even though I was still very much on the financial side when I was with the FAI, I continued to kind of try and build out a model and look at ways to analyze players and analyze player performance in a slightly different way than was being done in the industry at that time. And I always kind of thought, I don't know how kind of concrete it was, but I always kind of thought that was potentially a way in the door. I was involved in a lot of these kind of analytics or sabermetrics, which is what it's kind of technically called. A lot of those kind of online communities, and these ideas were starting to spread. It probably kicked off for me though when I got to UEFA, because once I joined UEFA, the information I had at my disposal really grew. It went from being just stuff at the Irish level to stuff at the global level. And I was able to then start putting some of my ideas together with Opta data. And then because the US has a very open system when it comes to player salaries, they're all publicized, which now as a GM, I don't like, but back then it was great. And I pulled all this information together and yeah, I just built a model. And it just happened that a guy I had crossed paths with in the UK, he'd been commercial director at Derby County. He came over here and was now the president of the Colorado Rapids. And they weren't doing too well. And he knew I was looking at things from an analytics perspective. And he asked if I'd do a review of the club. Did that, popped over and gave the presentation to them. And they kind of asked if I would if I would come over full time to kind of almost advise or introduce analytics to the club and look at player recruitment through that lens. And it just kept kind of going from there, and came over, did that for a few years. And then, 3 years ago, got the opportunity to take over the club, hook, line and sinker, and now get to put it fully into practice and make sure and see if everything I thought was going to work does work. And thankfully, touch wood, so far we're in a good direction. So it's been a long story, a long circuitous route, but full of good adventures along the way.
So if you were to summarize, I mean, what do you think are the sort of key characteristics that helped you achieve that goal? What was it that made it happen?
You said optimism at the start.
Hard work or?
Well, yeah, I mean, it does go without saying there's got to be hard work. Like, I think you've got to have persistency. You've got to be willing to be persistent and to continue to kind of move forward, even if it does seem a little bit outlandish. So there was a lot of hard work there, because you've got your own job as well. So you've got to do your job and then go home and try and work on this thing that has absolutely no guarantees at the time of working or putting you in a position to go and take up a role like this longer term. So I think that was definitely a key part of it. And, as I said, you said optimistic at the start, or looking to chat about optimism. That was certainly a part of it. I just kept believing that this was something that was badly needed. And, I looked at the way the industry went about recruitment, and it just didn't make sense. There's just too many players that are being, moved and bought and sold that don't necessarily work out. And I don't know how much at the time analysis was being done to understand why it wasn't working. So I think it was, finding something that I was truly passionate about, like really passionate about sport and about football, about being involved in football, and then seeing that there was maybe a gap there, and then being persistent in terms of, trying to refine it. I also think you have to be humble, and you have to be willing to accept, that what you're doing is not perfect, and that other people are going to be able to come in and absolutely blow it to smithereens, and you just have to take that on board. And I think that was always something that I realized. I mean, I have no hesitation in saying it now. The best thing about my job now, where I am, is that I get to hire somebody who really knows what they're doing when it comes to analytics. Everything that I did was building towards something, but I never thought for a second that I had like some kind of, all conquering idea or something that was going to.
It's the classic case of building a team to make you look good, almost.
Absolutely, 100%. It's the people around me that are allowing us to be where we are right now. We've got an incredible team over here, and I think once you understand that, and once you bring in really good people, it just, everything about an organization elevates at that point.
I did want to touch on that aspect you raised about what I would call authenticity as a leader. I mean, one of the things that makes you popular and such a good all-round bloke is your genuineness and honesty, I guess. And I've interviewed quite a few experts, motivational experts, etc., and they've all identified a really good trait of leadership is authenticity and vulnerability as well, being open to your mistakes. I remember reading one press article in the States that, it was quite a long interview, and you were just honest. You were honest with the fan base, honest where mistakes had been made. And I thought that was quite refreshing compared to a lot of the, media interviews we get in Europe, where it tends to be quite close, protective. I really enjoyed that level of honesty.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing, because if you go in, if you approach your work or your job or your passion, your hobby, whatever it is, closed-minded and thinking that you know it all, then you can't grow, you can't, improve or develop, and that to me just never made sense. And I think 3 years ago we got the opportunity. I say we, myself and my colleague Wayne Brandt, who's our senior VP on business operations. The two of us kind of looked at this and said, okay, how are we going to build this club? And one of the first things we said was, we need to be transparent, because it's not going to happen overnight. It just isn't. And we talked a lot at the time about saying to people that, we need to earn the trust here, because ultimately there's very little history there that would support what we're doing. So we knew there was going to be mistakes along the way, but we felt if we were open about it, you could start to earn that trust, and people would start to believe in what you were doing. Now, ultimately, we're involved in professional sports, so it needs to work. The team needs to start winning games, or you're going to be in trouble eventually. But I think by being open at the start, if the moves you make then actually, can be connected back to what you've said you're going to do, then people start to understand there's a plan. Now, I'm a big believer that to be successful in sport, you need two of three things. One of them is non-negotiable. You need a plan. You need to have a very thoughtful plan that gets you to where you need to go. So you've got your vision, you've got your mission, you've got your values, but then you need to have this plan that's going to get you there. Then you need to have one of either patience or a lot of money. You can throw a lot of money at soccer players and build a good team very quickly, but that's not necessarily the way that I believe it should be done. Patience, I think, is important because you're going to make mistakes along the way in that plan, and you're going to have to course correct from time to time. But you get there. You get there through understanding what you're trying to achieve, through bringing in good people all around you, through being open to take on board not just criticism necessarily, but the ideas of others. It's not about being critical. It's just about being open to other people's ideas and their viewpoints, and getting a more well-rounded view, a broader view of the industry that you're working in and what you're trying to do. And it's hugely important to us. And I've been so fortunate to have been surrounded by good people, all the way through my career. Learning from you at the very beginning of it, obviously.
Oh, thank you. And if you were to look back in your career and give some advice to people younger than themselves, certainly much younger than me, what would your key advice be?
I think for me, there's kind of two things. Like, I do truly believe in finding something that you're passionate about. I think that's really important in life. And that can be done in two ways. That's not necessarily about your job, that can be outside as well. But if you're looking at a career and you're passionate about what you do, and you enjoy what you do, I think that's always going to lend itself, to having a fulfilling career, I would say. The second thing then is hard work. And when I talk about hard work, I kind of mean like working the right way as well. I do remember going back right the way back to my Ernst & Young days. Like, there was a partner there, Breffney McGuire, who talked one day about being right about things. And I thought it was very arrogant when I first heard him say it. And it was only over time that I realized what he meant was that we do the work that's needed to get things right. And I always thought that was a really interesting piece, that, if you want to be successful, then you have to work at it. You have to continue to develop and continue to improve. And if you want to put yourself in a position where you can be successful, that only comes through hard work, practice, persistence, So I think they're the two things. Finding a passion and being willing to work, I think are critical components of it. It's a good combination, I think.
And at all times, keeping the flame lit in your dream and your passion, keep heading towards it, which you've been very successful at doing.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. You've always got to want a little bit more, I think, and that's good. And it's funny, when we set out to write up the vision for the club, we were very clear that it had to be really aspirational. Anybody who knows the city of Denver knows that we're a market full of big sports teams. We've got the Denver Broncos, obviously, in football, or in American football, I should say, on this one. But really, for us, we've got the Denver Nuggets, the basketball team, or in the Western Conference last year, the Colorado Avalanche, who almost won it all last year. You've got the Colorado Rockies, the Mammoth. You've just a bunch of sports teams here. But our vision when we set it out was to be the heartbeat of sport in the state of Colorado. And I remember a lot of people, when we kind of talked about this, were coming like, oh, you've missed a word there. You mean the heartbeat of this sport, as in, football or soccer. And I was like, no, we mean sport in general. This may be 25, 30 years down the line. But unless we're thinking about that, then, we've got no chance of being successful. And, you get real buy-in from that. People want to be involved in things that are aspirational. They want to be involved in things that are exciting and feel like they're contributing to something that's bigger and kind of is going to resonate for years to come. So I couldn't agree more with you. Keeping that flame lit is really important.
Yeah, I was always saying that to my team back in Virgin. I was always saying, "What's your BHAG?" And they were like, "What's your BHAG? Your audacious goal, your moonshot. You know, what are you striving for? What do you want to make in life?" Most folks don't give it much thought, to be honest. You know, it's a day to day, and get on with life, enjoy the day to day. But yeah, I very much I very much agree that you need that goal to keep you upskilling, as you identified earlier. You know, to keep you passionate, putting in the extra work.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, let's be honest, it can be scary. It can be scary on both a personal and a professional level to set yourself a target that feels so aspirational at the start. You know, it's, I mean, look, we all talk about stretch goals, and they're stretch goals for a reason, you know, that they may be challenging, they may be tough, but you know, it's the old saying of shooting for the stars, you know, or shooting for the moon, you could end up in the stars. Like there's good things that are going to happen when you aim high, you know, and I think when you're willing to commit to something like that, both personally and professionally, you know, that's a positive thing, but it can be challenging and scary at the beginning. There's no doubt.
I wanted to ask you about managing stress. I mean, you work in a high powered position, a lot of media attention and media focus. How do you deal with that level of pressure and stress?
Yeah, I don't know if I always deal with it brilliantly, to be perfectly honest with you. I think one of the first things I have to do is tell my mom not to look at Twitter, you know, so she couldn't read anything that was been said about me. It's a challenge, you know, because I am passionate about what I do. So especially on game day, when you don't actually control anything that's happening out on the field, that can be something I've got to watch that constantly tells me I need to, like, you know, take it down a little bit. But it's something that, you know, really resonates with me, is the need to try and control it, and the need to try and manage it. And whether it's trying to find a hobby, whether it's understanding that sometimes it's okay to just put it down and go for a walk, or you know, I took up running for a while and did a marathon, and now I'm training for a triathlon and things like that. So there's things that you can do to kind of, you know, switch off and unwind. And, you know, I think eventually you get to a point where you realize that not everything has to be solved in the minute. Not every problem is a problem that has to be solved right there and then. And there's massive need to switch off, to relax, to give yourself some space, because ultimately that's what's going to allow you to then make better decisions when you do pick things back up and when you get back up at it. And one of the big things from my perspective is, you know, we do try very hard to never make decisions during moments of high pressure. You know, there's obviously going to be, you know, times when things are needed quickly and you have to make a call. But I'm a big believer in analyzing things and thinking things through. I'm also a big believer in getting the opinion of the kind of key people that I have around me. And I think that's really been something that's been helpful to me, is understanding that, you know, you're as strong as your group. You know, it's not all about you. And sometimes it is okay to just take that moment and say, listen, I'm going to kind of listen to people here, going to take things on board, and then we're going to make a smart decision. It may go the way you want, it may not, and that's okay too. But as long as you're making smart decisions, then over time, that's going to lead to success. So I'll be honest with you, and it's something I still think about on a daily basis. I'm still trying to improve on and get better at it. But there is no doubt that how we manage stress is absolutely critical to our own success, both personally and professionally.
Yeah, yeah. No, it sounds as if you're certainly learning to evolve and deal with that pressure as your career progresses, which is great to hear.
Yeah, I think that's all we can do. As you said, it's all about development and trying to improve these things. They're not perfect, and certainly I know it's not for me, but you know, hopefully we'll continue to get better at it.
A few quick fire questions I always like to ask at the end of my interviews. You mentioned Moneyball earlier. Is that your favorite book, or what's your top book that you'd recommend?
Yeah, I do love Moneyball. To be honest, anything that Michael Lewis has written, in general, has been really really good. There's some other kind of books that, you know, obviously Moneyball is not necessarily a book that everybody would think of as being a professional book or a business book, but for me it was. But yeah, he's written some really good books, so I enjoy all of his.
And can you recommend any sort of TED Talks or motivational videos? Do you have any favorites in that space?
It's interesting with TED Talks. Like I tend to go on and look at some TED Talks that are kind of way off base. Right now, I'm on a bit of a space kick. I'm fascinated by what's going on in space. One of our I've got a friend who's involved in the industry. We've also got a colleague whose cousin has been is one of the astronauts that's been selected for that mission. So there's just some incredible things happening there. And again, it's something that's very different to anything that I'm dealing with, anything that I know about. So it's all new. And I also have a nephew back home who's fascinated by space. So I'm trying to learn up on that a little bit so I can chat to him.
Ah, great. So sounds like a good pastime, anyway, a bit of a distraction.
Exactly.
And do you have any favourite quotes?
I do, yeah. My favorite quote is a quote by Voltaire, which is that doubt is an unpleasant condition, but certainty is an absurd one. And that's something that I genuinely do live by. I like that. And the other one I kind of like is it's better to be thought of as a fool than open your mouth and confirm all doubt, So I think the first one for me is very much about understanding that doubt's okay, and understanding that you don't have to be certain about everything that you do. As we tackle problems, new issues, things that come up, you don't need to feel like your answer is 100%. It is okay to query. It is okay to question, and that for me has always then led to. It's always led to me then wanting the opinions of people that I really trust and people that I respect in their key areas. And that to me allows me, and from my position, that I make smart decisions. So that one's been the big one for me. The other one in terms of, better to be thought of as a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt is more about listening. It's a reminder to me to listen, and that, pardon me, I think we can all get very caught up in this modern world where everything is instant, everything is on demand. So I think it's very easy for us to be pulled into a situation where you think, that you've got a response before you even hear what the other person has to say. So that's always a reminder to me to just take a step back, listen, take it on board. And then hopefully when you do say something, it's of value rather than just being, more words that are put out there.
Ah, that's great advice. Thanks. I'll borrow these quotes at a later stage. Thank you. I'm very conscious of your time. You've got a football club to manage or to run, so I won't hold you any longer. Normally, I ask interviewees for the contact details, etc. But you're very public profile, so if anyone wants to follow you, they can find you very easily.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, I did want to ask as well. You've been over there for what, 8-9 years now?
6 years here, 4 years in Switzerland. So we've gone from Ireland
okay.
for about 10. Yeah.
6 years in the States. Can anyone pronounce your name yet?
No, they can't. Yeah, it's definitely a tricky one. So they've just gone with P over here. That's it. We'll leave it at that. And yeah, that's my name. So it's not a problem. To be honest, they've improved. And the one thing I'll always say about it is, like, I really like it when people try. As long as people make an effort, I don't mind them butchering it. It's not an easy name to pronounce if you've never seen it before. So as long as people try, I'm 100% on board with that. And then we can settle on P and make it easy for everyone then.
Ah, great. Well, listen, thanks so much for your time this morning, or this afternoon, this morning for you. I have to say, I mean, it's been great watching your career develop. I'm extremely proud to be your mate and, to be able to witness that. And I'm really, really happy that you're up there reaching for the stars and achieving. It's a real privilege to call you a friend. So thank you.
I really, really appreciate that. Genuinely do. And pleasure to come on this. This was fantastic. Really enjoyed it.
Great. Thanks, Bort. Take care.